So we're currently joined by just over 100 people. If you'd like to begin, that should be fine.
Good evening, everyone. The British Society for Surgery of the Hand is the UK's professional organisation for hand surgeons, and most hand surgeons in the UK are members. Within the Society, we harbour incredible talent. We have some of the best research brains in the UK, if not the world. We have brilliant orators and inspiring teachers, and we have some of the most technically skilled surgeons. But at times like this, it's important to remember that we are not just professionals, but we are also people. And we are not just colleagues, but to many, we are also friends. And we do not just sit together on committees, but we walk together through our careers and our lives. As you're about to hear, John Stanley did an amazing amount for hand surgery. But for me, his most memorable feature was his compassion. Regardless of the esteemed position that he had reached by the end of his career, he never lost his humility, and he continued to treat everyone he met, colleague or patient, great or small, with compassion. We can't all be the most technically skilled surgeon, the greatest orator, or the best scientist, but it is within all of our gifts to be compassionate to each other. John Stanley set us an example that as a society, we would do well to remember and to embed in the principles of the way we work. I'd now like to offer my great thanks to the Honorary Archivist for BSSH, Steve Hodgson. Steve was one of the many surgeons who was mentored and inspired by John, and he's worked immensely hard to put together this wonderful memorial service. So I'd like to hand over now to Steve, who's going to act as Master of Ceremonies for us. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Sue, and welcome everyone to what I think is probably a first for BSSH, that is a Zoom memorial in these very strange COVID times. I think Sue's set the scene very well there, and I will get an opportunity to say what I feel about John later on. But before we start, I do want to thank Emma Brighton, the IT lead for the Secretariat of BSSH. We've got an excellent secretariat, and Emma's done a fantastic job supporting us all. Saf, Ian and Mike have helped develop what I think is a very good programme that attempts to honour a great friend and colleague. There's four main parts to that, which I think is an indication of John's many talents. John, the UK surgeon, which includes his BSSH life. John, the international speaker. John, the trainer and mentor. And then the final and probably most important section, John, the person and colleague, where we've got lots of people from Wrightington telling that story. We are aware that there was a fifth really important part of John's life as a private person, and it's great that we've got Gail, the children and friends joining us this evening, and we do share your and understand and sympathise with your loss. So we're hoping it will run smoothly. There are going to be one or two technical glitches if you bear with us. I'm slightly concerned we may overrun because there is so much of a story to tell. But really, there's nowhere else to go on a Friday evening in lockdown UK. And I think if he was watching, John would probably appreciate a bit of an overrun. So over to Ian, who's going to summarise John's biography.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to pass on my thanks, or people, our thanks to Steve and Society for setting up this tribute. As you've heard, my name is Ian Trail, one of John's colleagues at Wrightington Hospital. I've known John since I was appointed as a Hand Society Fellow at the hospital in 1987. From that time on, John became my teacher, mentor, and then friend. The Hand Society have asked me to say a few words about John's professional life. As you will hear, this is a feat. Medicine from the University of Liverpool in 1968. By that time, he'd already married Gail. He underwent his medical training, orthopedic training in the Mersey region. Towards the end of his orthopedic training, John developed hand surgery. Appointed as a consultant hand surgeon in Wrightington Hospital in 1979. From that time on, John set up a building that became the upper wing. He remained head of service until his retirement 30 years later in 2009. At this time, the unit has 13 consultants, 9 fellows or senior trainees from around the globe annually. It is a unit of national and international repute. John was feared of that achievement. Be under no illusion, however, that without determination, that wouldn't. If you want to elected at Wrightington Hospital, on the day flags were at half-mast, and at 10 a.m. the hospital went silent for 2 minutes. Returning to 1979, appointment was in hand surgery, and I took a number of presentations and publications, become a member of the British Society of the Hand, otherwise known as the Hand Society. Also be elected to council and serve as president in 1999. John had a presidential meeting close by the hospital in Blackpool. In fact, it was a joint meeting with the Swiss Hand Society. Whilst all of those who attended were particular individual memories, the meeting could only be described as particularly unique. Prior to that, in 1996, John had been a professor at the University of Manchester, a rare appointment in those days. The ultimate accolade, however, came in 2006, when John was appointed a pioneer in hand surgery by the International Society of Surgery of the Hand. To put that in perspective, there have only been 10 such nominations from the UK. Our name now sits alongside all the greats of hand surgery from around the world. Those that have been are now, and those that will come. John of hand surgery. For example, he was president of the British Association of Hand Therapists. He was president of the British Rheumatoid Arthritis Surgical, British Elbow and Shoulder Society. In addition, he was given an honorary member of the British Orthopedic Association, having given a prestigious Robert Jones lecture. Towards the end of his career, John developed an interest in surgery more generally and was elected to the Royal College of England. Between 2010 and 2012, he served as senior vice president. John was more than a list of titles and appointments. He was also a great researcher. Over 100 published articles on hand surgery in journals that bear his name. I'm honored to say that I'm co-author on a number of them. He was also a great writer. A textbook of hand surgery, particularly on wrist arthroscopy, but also multiple chapters for other people's books. His particular strength, however, was a teacher or lecturer and speaker. Whether it was fellows at Wrightington Hospital, up last summer, just before lockdown, or more regionally, nationally, internationally, John would enthrall his audience. He gave invite to the American Hand Society, Australian Hand Society, amongst others. He also spoke at pretty much every European hand society, including the Greek, Spanish, Swiss, Dutch, Belgian, French several times. He was an honorary member of not all these societies. I used to think this was rather ironic, really, that he was an avid Brexiteer. John also had an excellent relationship with patients. Men stayed under his care for all his professional life, while he reconstructed problems in their hands and wrists. Many of them suffering from that dreadful disease, rheumatoid arthritis. Many of them still ask after him to this day. I was reminded earlier that John had the uncanny ability to assess the outcome of a surgical procedure merely from a patient's expression or appearance, and if appropriate, transfer the consultation to a colleague or willing fellow. I don't think John needed a dash or a pen score. As a final exercise, I tried to identify one word that would best describe John's professional contribution, a descriptor if you like. Yet another difficult task. So many alternatives. He was obviously highly intelligent, he was passionate, cared for his patients. He would always go the extra mile for them. He had a great sense of humour, a great teacher, as you've heard. He was an innovator, and he helped to develop a finger prosthesis, an elbow joint prosthesis, as many instruments that are still used around the wrist joint. He was a pioneer. By that I mean he helped develop various techniques for hand surgery and refine old ones. Again, many of them still in use today. He's been described by many as charismatic. Certainly in the operating room, he was a master craftsman, a master technician. Things looked so easy, annoying at times. Many visitors who came to watch him would operate would say, "How did he do that? Or could you show me that again?" The word I have chosen, however, is inspirational. John's inspirational to all those around him. This is not simply because of what you just heard, although in itself that would have been enough. As many of you are aware, John, however, had significant health issues for most, if not all, his professional life. Certainly all the time with him, I can't remember how many times I visited in the hospital. Gail would often say from a health perspective, there were many dark days in John's life. Yet despite that, and at times, and he would talk about his health, its effect on himself and others around him, and but he always was positive, enthusiastic, glass half full. He retained and indeed refined his marvelous sense of humour. He would have many a time on the journey or meeting, often with managers, with amusing anecdotes. His disdain of authority was legendary. In fact, I'm being lasting fun and jokes shared. John was also an ideas man, in fact, brimming with ideas on occasion. Many of them brilliant, some, let's say, a little less practical. He was also a doer. He put shoulder to the wheel when needed to get an idea or project over the line. Yes, John Stanley was truly inspirational to his colleagues, the juniors, in fact, all life and outside. He will, of course, be fondly remembered and sadly missed by all his friends, colleagues, staff, patients at Wrightington Hospital, past and present, as well as his friends and colleagues at the Hand Society and college agents. He was widely by all people from all corners of the globe whose life he touched. On a personal note, I think I can speak for his close colleagues. We have lost a dear friend who will be sadly missed.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Ian. Some of the sound wasn't coming through, but we certainly got the gist of the obituary, and thank you so much for that. I'm going to move on to the next speaker, who in fact is Gus McGrowther. Now, Gus McGrowther is in Singapore, and due to the time difference, he has sent through a recording, which I'll now attempt to play. So, as you're aware, tonight we'll be commemorating the life of John Stanley, Professor Stanley, so dear to all of us. And of course, due to the time zone issue, you can't be with us live until you kindly agreed to do this interview via Zoom, which is fantastic. So, Prof, can you tell me about when did you first meet John Stanley?
Well, I met John at one of Frank Burke's courses about 40 years ago.
Okay.
And Frank had these great international names coming along, and John Stanley was the measure of any one of them. He was the equal of any of these international stars. Dramatic person.
Okay, and you remember it well, the first time you met him. Was he speaking that day?
Yes, John was speaking and held the audience in the palm of his hand as always.
Yeah. Yes, I remember it well myself. And so what do you think, or what struck you about him? What was unique about John Stanley for you?
Yes, there were three things I would mention that really stand out. One is he was a great teacher. He taught with great passion. The second one was he had a great sense of humour. And the third one was he had a tremendous wisdom.
Yeah, yeah. And the humour for those who've met him, they will all recall. I mean, can you remember any particular examples of his humour?
One striking example was he was set up in a debate at the international meeting in Sydney against a French surgeon, and they were debating how to manage the lower end of the ulnar. And John was speaking for the Darach, and the Frenchman was speaking for the Sauvé-Capangé technique. And John was first to speak, and as he rose to his feet, he said that he was out to get as many votes as he possibly could. So he apologized for his approach, but effectively he would like to address his French colleague by perhaps reminding him of the Battle of Trafalgar, at which British won the battle, sea battle. And then he went on to Waterloo and slowly dismantled the poor French adversary. And when the hands went up at the end to cast the vote, no doubt John's technique won. And he did this without offending anybody. It was all done in wonderful taste. Even the Frenchman clapped and smiled.
And I guess that leads on to his wisdom, really, in terms of...
Yes, and I think the best example I have of John's wisdom was he was an examiner in the Hand Fellowship held in Manchester that time. And he was examining a candidate who was really struggling. You know, he could go up or down, and John had to sort of sort out where this candidate would be placed. So out of nowhere, John produced a tourniquet, took off his jacket, held out his arm, and handed the candidate the tourniquet. Yeah. And the candidate took the tourniquet and put it this way and that way and tried turning it through 90 degrees. And that was the end. And John just turned around, and with that memorable facial expression, which said, "Well, that's it, isn't it?" He didn't have to say a word. The candidate was downed, but done again with a little bit of humour and great taste and delicacy. Yeah. And the candidate no doubt came back and got his fellowship in due course. So three things that stand out, but there's a fourth one, and that is that behind every great man, there is a great woman. That's not a very politically correct thing to say nowadays, and John would be the first to recognise that his wife had actually gone up further up the social ladder than himself, becoming High Sheriff of Lancashire. And John used to joke that it was actually he was behind Gail rather than the other way around. And it's a wonderful memory because Gail married us, Julie and I, not John, Julie and I, in Manchester Art Gallery, because as High Sheriff of Lancashire, she had this position. But Gail was always there. They were a very, very warm couple.
So very close to you then, really.
Yes. A wonderful man. We'll all remember him forever.
So thank you to Gus for that recording. Very moving at the end there. I'd like to invite Frank Burke now to speak and address us all. Frank, I need you to unmute. Thank you. No, can't hear you. Okay, we'll see if we can help sort something out, Frank. And what I'll do is I'll move on to David Elliott's recording. Oh, can you think we might be able to hear you? No. Okay, we'll move on, and then we will try and sort something out. I'll move on to Frank. I'll move on to David Elliott, and we'll come back to you, Frank. Try and sort that out. So I'm going to share again.
Although
Sorry about this. Here we go.
Although the passing of John is a matter of great sadness, and my family and I offer our condolences to Gail and the rest of the family, it's right that we celebrate such a life of great achievement as we are doing with a gladness for it. Although I never worked with John surgically, I had the good fortune to interact with him over a number of years in the British Society.
Lost sound. You see, I think we may have switched it on. No, I Everyone got no sound. No sound at present.
Is it just me, or I can't hear anything actually?
No, we can't hear.
We can't hear it.
Although the passing of John is a matter of great sadness, and my family and I offer our condolences to Gail and the rest of the family, it's right that we celebrate such a life of great achievement as we are doing with a gladness for it. Although I never worked with John surgically, I had the good fortune to interact with him over a number of years in the British Society for Surgery of the Hand, particularly in the year 1999 when John was president and I was secretary of the society. This year, 1999, was both full of activity and also of fun, and was a considerable learning curve for me. John came to the president post already established internationally and with a well-defined and copious agenda. This was intended to make improvements within the society, but also to boost the position of the society, both in the UK and internationally. Like all presidents, he inherited ongoing projects, which he pushed forward with the same vigor that he applied to his own agenda. Underlying any change he hoped to make, and mostly did make, was a huge driving force for improvement and for fairness and democracy, which was much to my liking. Always done with a sincerity which made my job as his lieutenant not only worthwhile, but also enjoyable. And I suspect this way of doing things was one of the foundations of his success elsewhere, of which others will talk today. In short, 1999 was a busy year for the society. More often than not, when decisions were made, there was a twinkle in John's eye that many of you will have experienced, and which I interpreted rightly or wrongly as a statement that either we're about to do battle, or we should have some fun with this, or a bit of both. The Healing Foundation was started in this year, and BSSH was a founding member.
John also involved heavily in trying to get more distinction awards for consultant hand surgeons in the National Merit Award system, and also in helping members get discretionary points in the new hospital system of advancement. He encouraged our members to involve in the European hand surgery exam, which was the only one on the market at the time. At home, we fought clear of becoming a satellite of the mighty British Orthopaedic Association, who at that time wanted to absorb the Hand Society. Unfortunately, less successful were attempts to raise interest within court circles to having a member of the royal household become our patron and gain us a place at Buckingham Palace garden parties by way of raising the profile of hand surgery. This was important at that time. Plastic surgery had a problem then of having a bad profile in that the public thought plastic surgery equaled cosmetic surgery. We had an even worse profile in that no one knew what hand surgery was. We fought also to be considered an independent training speciality from orthopedics and plastics, which was an ongoing battle for presence of the society over a number of years. We also experienced a new problem in that year, that of untrained medical groups doing hand surgical procedures with minimal surgical training. At the time, John was our representative with the European Federation FESH, and the autocratic behavior of its ruling officials at the time irritated him considerably. So he was delighted when the reins of this organization passed into the hands of Stephen Hovius in Rotterdam, whom he felt might understand better the meaning of the word democracy. I think it would be amiss to ignore John's Blackpool meeting. John was determined with a twinkle in his eye that his meeting would be in Blackpool, whatever others in the society might feel about this peripheral, arguably outlandish venue. I'd been to Blackpool once previously as a 6-year-old with my Liverpudlian maternal grandfather. At the time I was suffering from DNV, and my only memory was of standing on a windswept seafront and being forced at intervals to take spoonfuls of kaolin and morph, which for those who've not experienced this treatment is truly disgusting, even if effective. So I was curious to see if Blackpool had more to offer. Well, it certainly did. The hotel was good, albeit improved by Gail insisting that the manager have the windows cleaned as we were hosting the surgeons of the Swiss Society. The meeting was excellent and our guests enjoyed themselves, though perhaps bemused by the bus trip along Blackpool's seafront. The evening meal was equally good, and my daughter, then aged 11, and somehow sitting beside John, still remembers the dinner as entirely occupied with a discussion with John about the Simpsons, who she thought at the time were obviously a major interest in life for both of them. I tell this tale as it's typical of the joys of knowing and working with John. He was a driving force for advance of hand surgery, with good ideas of his own, but prepared to tilt a lance at any problem arising, and always game for fun in so doing. Like you all, I'm sad at his passing, but very glad and privileged to have known and worked with him.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Sorry, let me start again. I'd like to thank David Elliott for that recording. And while we sort out issues with Frank Burke, I'd like to invite Stuart Watson to say a few words.
I would like to take you back to the early 1980s in the northwest of England. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
At that time, orthopedic hand surgeons were very much orthopedics and plastic hand surgeons were very plastic. There were two very different stables with poor understanding of what each group were doing. And as both specialties were expanding rapidly with your wrist work in orthopedics and microsurgery and plastics, it was a great need to get together. So John was keen to break these barriers down between orthopedics and plastics, and in three ways. Firstly, we joined each other's operating lists several times a year. And I remember many lists with John exploring camptodactylies and doing flaps and tendon stuff together. I did try and lure John onto the operating microscope, but I don't think it was quite him. I vividly remember visiting John at Wrightington on the day he had a new toy. He was very excited by his new toy. It was a 2mm wrist scope, but it might have been 2.5, I'm not sure. And he demonstrated a series of wrist joints to us with his usual panache, and of course with his continuous enthusiastic dialogue. And then he said, and I remember this very distinctly, he said, "You're not supposed to be able to look into the mid-carpal joint, but let's try it." And I believe this was his first mid-carpal scoping. And as they say, the rest was history. The second way to bring specialists together was establishing the Northwest Hand Dining Club, now the Northwest Surgical Hand Society. And John, with Ian Trail, Mike Morris, Nabil Fahmy, and some others, we had our first meeting in the Midland Hotel, April 87. It proved to be eye-wateringly expensive, so we had to move subsequent meetings to the Stanley Lands. They were very informal get-togethers, 4 times a year, very convivial and well supported. There are up to 30 surgeons attending with trainees, occasionally with diagnostic consultants and therapists. There was lots of good food and drink, but the main part of the meeting were the case presentations and discussions before, during, and after each course. And we had slides and x-rays, so that dates us, doesn't it? So the presentations always provoked lively discussion and banter. No quarter was given. Any hint of hubris was roundly dealt with. Any showboating was met with jeers. Any dubious management of cases with cries of "show us your follow-up." So orthopedics vying with plastics to show us all our new wares. So this type of meeting might not be the choice of postgraduate deans, but it was just what was needed at the time to understand the scope of hand surgery and research that was going on around the Northwest. And John's third way of bringing us together was he very enthusiastically applied for a BSSH sponsored hand fellow in '91, a fellow between Wrightington, Stockport and Withington. And such fellowships that we know have been important developments in hand surgery. So if I'm allowed, just finally, I would just like to deviate away from surgery to recount a famous flop shot. Now, this isn't surgery, this is golf. John was an enthusiastic golfer, and we had the most memorable round at his club in Ormskirk. Now, a round of golf with John was never dull. He had the characteristic of the famous Lee Trevino. He talked and joked the whole way round, as I record he did when he was operating. So our match ebbed and flowed. It was all square as our balls landed short of the 18th green. And John had a deep bunker between his ball and the flag. Great, I uncharitably thought to myself, I've got him. He's never going to get that ball up and over that bunker for 2. So John, in the manner reminiscent of that endoscopy list many years ago, he said, "This calls for a flop shot. You're not supposed to be able to play this shot from this kind of line." He got out his 60-degree wedge. He opened the blade flat on the turf. His weight was well on his left foot. He put a very slow, controlled swing on the ball, powerful swing, and the ball climbed, and it hung in the air. It floated over the bunker, and it landed softly on the green, just inches from the pin. It was a crushing, game-winning shot. John, I'd like to thank you for your great enthusiasm in everything that you showed.
Thank you so much, Stuart, for that. And we will now go back to Frank and see whether we've got some sound, Frank. No. Oh dear. Okay, we will keep trying, and I'd like to invite now Alberto Lupp from Kaplan to speak to us. And Alberto, I have got your slides, so I'm gonna share those slides now.
Thank you.
If you just give me 1 second.
Okay.
So I'm sharing those slides now. Can you see them?
Yes. Can I start, Saf?
Over to you. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everybody. I met John Stanley about 26 years ago when I invited him to lecture on rheumatoid arthritis in Barcelona. And since then, we became a very good friends. Can you pass the slide? The other guest speaker was Ed Nelbo from Boston. Can you pass it? Next. In my opinion, they were the most talented surgeons treating rheumatoid hands in America and Europe. Furthermore, they were great speakers with a great sense of humor. Next. John Stanley made difficult problems look easy. Next. And John once said, when you are in deep shit, say nothing and try to look like you knew what you were doing. Next. In October 1999, John organized, as was mentioned before, a great combined meeting with both the British Society for Surgery of the Hand and the Swiss Society in Blackpool. And the presidents were John Stanley and Beth Seaman. Next. And then a big friendship started, and I participated with John in many roundtables and debates, and I can assure you that I never enjoyed and I learned so much from him. Next. But behind this, as was mentioned before, behind the great man, there is always a great woman. And finally, to finish my presentation, I would like to give my condolences to his wife, Gail. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alberto, for that. And I'd now like to invite Andrew Chin to speak.
Yeah, I'd like to share screen.
Yes, Andrew, I will.
Can you all see?
Yes.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much for a kind invitation for me to speak at this very unique situation. I want to, first of all, thank the British Society for Surgery of the Hand, as well as the family of late Professor John Stanley. Just briefly, how did our paths cross? I mean, I come from Singapore, which is almost halfway around the world. And I just completed specialist training back in 2005. And I was earmarked to set up a risk service in the hospital. And thankfully, I was given a grant to do an overseas fellowship at a renowned center of excellence. And that happened to be John Stanley's hand unit at Wrightington. He has graciously decided to take me up as a clinical fellow in 2006. And I spent 9 fruitful months over there, and the rest is history. So briefly, what are the qualities of Professor Stanley when I first met him? Not only was he a top-notch trainer and educator, his reputation precedes him at a point in time. And I actually got more than what I bargained for. Well, Professor Stanley taught me how to be a leader. He's inspirational, he's diplomatic, consultative, decisive, firm, and always looking for a win-win situation. And that is truly a mark of a very, very great leader. And he has all these qualities in him. When I just met him, not just for the first minute, I could actually see for myself what a great man he was. How to be a mentor. He was very nurturing, as all the speakers preceding me have actually confirmed. He's very encouraging, supportive, and always lending a listening ear and a helping hand in whatever situation that you may be in. How to be a public speaker? His wit, his unique and timely humor has always been a hallmark of Professor Stanley. He's eloquent, engaging, and last but not least, very classy. And last but not least, he's also someone who taught me how to be a true gentleman, always polite, with a proper decorum. He's never lost temper during the 9 months that I had interacted with him very closely. And he's always on the lookout for everyone. And is always as charming as ever. So even as a brilliant educator and trainer, as you can see from the slides here, he was actually invited to Singapore back in 2007 to the wrist arthroscopy course, as well as numerous international meetings where he actually stood and taught from his heart all the different things that he have experienced and all the tips and tricks that he has taught us. Right, his personality is par none, and he makes complicated and complex stuff so easy, as what Alberto has pointed out earlier. And he has immortalized many phrases and sentences. I'm sure most, if not all, fellows who have trained under him will know his famous phrase called "tea and sympathy," which to this day I'm still, echoing his sentences to my trainees and fellows alike. His ability to give a fluid and seamless running commentaries during lab demonstrations and live surgeries are really something to behold, right? I mean, he does it with such ease, and it's such effortless demeanor. So it just amazes everyone. And he's always good at giving off the cuff and impromptu, witty sentences, literally at the drop of the hat, and it makes it sound so natural to everybody. And he's also a very sought after international speaker. As you can see from these slides, he was actually in Singapore in 2016 and giving his lecture to a group of hand surgeons here, as well as in 2007 when he spoke at the course. And of course, I just managed to take one of the slides to actually show that, all his humors and all the experiences that he has encountered, he makes it so light and so humorous, so that it makes it memorable, and everybody will go back with a very, very lasting impression upon what he has delivered. He's excellent in his craft, well read and well published, very eloquent, both as an orator and a debater. And he has so much first-hand experiences and challenge to draw from, invaluable tips and tricks to learn and pick up from his lifelong experience in hand surgery. He's well connected with amazing networking skills. Is something which I always try to emulate. And he's trained so many fellows who in turn send out invitations to visit the centers and countries for academic and education activities. So he always keeps this thing running so that everyone is connected, not only to share the Wrightington experience, but also to perpetuate it. So last but not least, he has left us, but his legacy and memories will continue to live on. This I thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. That's really beautiful words, thoughtful words, and summed up John so well. I'd like to invite Mark Garcia to say some words now.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Mark.
Thank you. Well, my dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to remember the first time I had a substantial conversation with John Stanley. It was in Paris on May 26, 1992. It was during the 5th Congress of the International Federation of Societies for Surgery of the Hand. That morning, I remember that I presented a kinematic study of several partial fusions based on experiments done not long before at the Mayo Clinic. In the mid-morning coffee break that followed that session, I was chatting with some colleagues, Alberto was there, and then I saw John approaching our table. Somebody could think about something easy to introduce himself or to introduce him to me, but the first sentence he told me was, "Do you know why escapeful night fusions do well in some patients while in others don't?" I thought, wow, what a way to start a relationship here. I did not know the answer to that question. Now I know it. It has to do with different patterns of wrist motion that Drs. Cragen and Stanley were about to publish those days. Anyway, I thought that I had to be grateful to him. Why? Because instead of trying to embarrass me in public in the main session that day, he waited until the session was over and shared with me what he knew about that subject. Don't ask me why, but that morning I knew that I had met a very unique and special person. Now it's almost 30 years have passed since that morning, 30 years of mutual respect and admiration for each other's achievements. Well, now, as you know, I'm presiding the International Federation of Societies for Surgery of the Hand. On behalf of the Council of the IFSSH, which I am honored to preside, let me join you in this well-deserved homage to the memory of John. We all learn a lot from his kindness, his intelligence and enthusiasm. He was a true gentleman and academic scholar who will be missed fondly. His understanding of the corpus, mixed with his amazing sense of humor, will live on inside us forever. Goodbye, John. You will always be in our hearts. Thank you.
And thank you so much, Mark, for that. Can I invite Stuart Fleming to address us?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Gail, BSSH. Thank you for giving me the honor of talking today about John. I was the BSSH Pulvertar Fellow at Wrightington in 1990, and it was a great privilege to be with John. At that time, Anthony Berger and Steve Turner were also working with John as his fellows. He was delighted to have 3 fellows at the time, as this was something at that stage unique in the United Kingdom. Anthony had just come back from the Kleiner Institute, and like me, he wore loops and a headset headlight, so that when we operated together, occasionally these would clash. John, in his typical way, said that watching us operate was like watching 2 stags in the rutting season. And this was typical of John's sense of humor. At the time, he said there were 2 things that he hadn't achieved. One was a personal chair in surgery, and the other was a knighthood. With this in mind, when we finally came to the end of our fellowships, we clubbed together and bought him a director's chair, and with the help of the illustration department, had written on the back of it the chair of hand surgery in gold letters, and underneath this, Sir John, S-U-R, space G-E-O-N, Stanley. We presented this to him at a dinner at Rydal Mount, where we were wonderfully entertained by Gail. And he was tickled pink with this. It was typical of the way that he was, and his sense of humor and sense of fun about everything in surgery. I think I spoke to both Anthony and Steve in the last couple of days. I think the thing that we felt was most important that we learned from John, and which has been alluded to already, was not just the technical skills that he taught us and the medical knowledge that he gave us, but the way in which he conducted himself, the whole ethos around surgery. He was a true transformational leader, as they say these days, and always pushing people forward, getting them to make the best of themselves and inspiring them. And he did this with a great sense of humor and engagement. John, we will all miss you. And I think that the world, and in particular the world of hand surgery, is a better and a safer place for everything that you taught us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stuart, for that tribute. And I would now like to go to Biet Simon. Biet, if you could please address us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Dear Gail, dear family, dear colleagues and friends, I have lost a dear and close friend and will miss him greatly. John and I were peers and above all, very, very good friends. Only a few weeks before he died, we had a long telephone call and promised each other that we would meet as soon as we could travel again. And we were so much looking forward to this reunion. We first met John and Gail at the home of Régis Lisfranc in Paris after our lectures at the French Hand Society, and we instantly bonded to each other. John and I just had so much in common, professionally as well as personally. John's charisma attracted us immediately, along with his wide-ranging interests, his wonderful sense of humor, and his encyclopedic knowledge of art and science. Our professional careers also had close similarities. John was appointed as a consultant hand surgeon at Rheintington in 1979, and he built the upper limb unit. I was appointed to head the upper limb unit at the Schultes Clinic in Zurich 10 years later in 1989. We both had a very deep interest in rheumatoid arthritis surgery. John was president of the British Rheumatoid Arthritis Surgical Society, and I had served as president of the European Rheumatoid Arthritis Surgical Society. As a result of this, John honored me by asking to lecture at Rheintington on several occasions, and I have really enjoyed these occasions. One of the special highlights of the large European meetings was for the participants to defend a controversial surgical therapy, and the audience would then elect a winner. John would inevitably win, as I had absolutely no chance of competing against his keen arguments and incisive delivery, casually peppered with amusing anecdotes. Thankfully, his prize was usually a bottle of whiskey that we happily drank together, toasting our wives and our great friendship. In 1999, John and I served as presidents of our hand societies. It seemed so logical to combine our knowledge and efforts, and so we started to hold our presidential meetings together. John then invited the Swiss Hand Society to a joint meeting with the British Hand Society to Blackpool. You have mentioned it before. Something that Jan Trail described as particularly unique, and I fully agree. It was a huge success, especially for the Swiss, and was definitely the highlight of my presidency. Besides his outstanding talents as a teacher and speaker, John was also a great writer and the co-author of many books. For me, what stood out about John was his love of his family, his friends, and the care of his patients, his wonderful sense of humor, his intelligence and kindness, his passion and focus on whatever he was doing, and his desire to help other people, however and wherever he could. Our close friendship led to many happy times spent with each other in our homes, which sadly brings me back to my last phone call with him. With John's passing, a bright light has gone out of numerous people's lives. However, I know that I'm speaking for so many of you here today when I say that his memory will live on through us all. We will greatly miss him. Thank you. I would like to hand over to Lee Osterman.
Good evening. Am I unmuted, Beth?
Yeah, we can hear you, Lee.
Oh, good. Well, I'm here in Colorado, out west with Mark Barrett, and there are very few things that would make both of us give up a day of powder skiing. And John, and remembering him is certainly one of them. We would like to add our condolences to Gail and the family. And as I've listened to the previous speakers, much of what I have echoes the themes that they have raised. I'm honored to provide an American perspective to talk about John Stanley, my colleague, my teacher, and my friend. I first made the pilgrimage to Wrightington in 1982 when I was a traveling fellow visiting the wrist meccas of Europe. Sir John Charnley had put Wrightington on the international map, but it was John who built the upper limb unit that has kept it in the world spotlight. He has built a unit of talent that is unsurpassed. As a rookie who was interested in wrist arthroscopy, John was gracious in answering my naive questions and full of good humor. Like the greatest teachers, it was not the facts he supplied, but his method of teaching that made me a different person. I returned 10 years later, and this time I brought my 14-year-old daughter Meredith, as my wife Elisa could not come. It was a wonderful father-daughter experience. Now, while I was at the meeting, John appointed some hapless registrar to take Meredith to Blackpool to the amusement park. And later, Gail took Meredith under her wing to the Beatles experience in Liverpool. Based upon that experience, Meredith said she first realized what fun being a hand surgeon was, and subsequently fulfilled that ambition. She also learned to appreciate the lyrics of I Want to Hold Your Hand and other English pop music. So John, I thank you and Gail for inspiring my daughter to join our field of hand surgery and care about Paul McCartney. Later, he sent me a signed copy of his wrist arthroscopy book in which he wrote that it included a return ticket to Wrightington, so I could present my perspective and be shown the error of my ways. And so I did return for the 25th year celebration of the hand unit in 2004. It was around that time that Gail was appointed High Sheriff of Lancashire. John took tremendous pride in her accomplishment, but to an American like me, whose image of the sheriff was crystallized by the sheriff of Nottingham in Disney movies, a sheriff who screamed out, cancel the kitchen scraps for the lepers and orphans, no more merciful beheadings, call off Christmas. As he was showing me around the Great Hall, John said Gail's only like that part of the time and only at home. John was an ambassador of British hand surgery. In that sense, he reminds me of his namesake, Sir Henry Morton Stanley, the Welsh explorer of Africa who searched and found not only the lost missionary David Livingstone, but also the source of the Nile. Well, John Stanley, I presume, he explored the unknown territory of the wrist and revealed its secrets around the world. For those exploits, he was awarded many honorary degrees, including being recognized as a pioneer of hand surgery by the IFSH. John also came to America and was an honored professor at our annual wrist course in Philadelphia, where his discussions and solutions of complex wrist topics wowed the large audience of hand surgeons and therapists. This was most evident by the gasps that arose when discussing an algorithm about the unsolved VC dilemma. His options started with benign neglect and ended with thermonuclear war. He was so adept at teaching, he could teach wrist anatomy with a paperclip. My presidential year for the Hand Society was 2011. The annual meeting was in Cancun and John was my invited speaker. Unfortunately, his medical condition suddenly precluded travel. He called and asked if he could send a stand-in, Mike Hayden. Mike delivered a talk full of pearls and Stanley-esque quotes that brought home to me what a role model and inspirational teacher John truly was. As a teacher, we never know what lives we truly influence, but I got a firsthand view of his professional legacy on my last trip to Wrightington for the Charnley Centennial. It was really a tennial about John. After the conference, sitting around his house, trainee after trainee after trainee stood up to tell their favorite John Stanley anecdote. To have created so many stories, to have influenced so many lives, to have been a friend to so many, speaks to the uniqueness and greatness that John Stanley was. The British £2 coin had on its edge the inscription, "Standing on the shoulders of giants." Sorry. John was such a giant that he lofted the world of hand surgery. Then again, what I miss most is his mischievous twinkle in his eyes. Thank you. I'd now like to have Mark.
So this is special for me to be here because Lee Osterman introduced me to John Stanley, and in turn, Ian Trail, Mike Hayton, and many of the brilliant members of the BSSH. So it's an honor to be here. John, this is for you and for Gail.
John will miss you.
Thank you so much, Lee and Mark, for that beautiful tribute. I'm going to try one more time to go back to Frank. I think we heard some noises come from you. Do you want to try one more time, Frank, before we leave it? Oh, no, we can hear background noise only. Sorry, Frank. Okay, well, I know you've sent a message that you will be writing to Gail, and you send your condolences to Gail and the family, and that has been noted, and I'm sure she'll look forward to receiving your correspondence. I'm going to hand over now to Steve to take over the rest of the memorial. Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Zaf, and thank you for steering us so smoothly through that fantastic sections. So I'm Steve Hodgson. I'm an orthopaedic hand surgeon in Bolton, and I had the privilege of working with John at Wrightington on 2 occasions as a trainee. First in 1987, when the hand unit was just John, the registrar, and his 2 excellent hand therapists, both of whom I'm pleased we'll hear from later on. And then I returned as a hand fellow 5 years later in 1992, when the unit was already expanding quite quickly with Ian's arrival and 2 or 3 fellows at any one time. I make no apologies for being slightly repetitive from what we've heard, but thought about John and describing him in 3 words. They would be intelligent, inspiring, and what's perhaps a bit new for this evening is interested, which is what really made him a great trainer, and once you'd left Wrightington, a fantastic mentor. People have already said about his intelligence, how he made simple things, complex things appear very simple. I think it's an Einstein quote, into that only 2 types of people think complex subjects are simple. That's people who don't understand at all, and real experts. And he certainly made complex subjects such as the rheumatoid hand and wrist kinematics a bit simpler for me. I'm not sure I ever got as far as he did with his deep understanding of those complex subjects. You couldn't help be inspired by being a trainee at Wrightington, John's charisma, the cutting edge specialist surgery that you were exposed to, and the real faith he showed in you, being comfortable allowing you to present his keynote research. But it's perhaps the fact that he was so interested in his trainees that really made him stand out as a trainer. And I began to understand that a bit better on one of the very few occasions where I witnessed him speechless. That was on an away day, a leadership away day for hand surgeons and spinal surgeons as part of a Northwest initiative to develop clinical networks. And we all had to do a Myers-Briggs profile, and we're all sat there expectantly awaiting our feedback. And I remember the facilitator saying, about half of you are one particular profile. It's very common amongst doctors and surgeons, so that's not surprising. Another fair proportion are a second group, and that's maybe a bit more common amongst nurses, because your people who are perhaps in tune with patients' feelings and make decisions based on that rather than logic. And at that point, John put his hand up and said, well, I'm an ENFP, you've not mentioned that yet. What does that mean? And this facilitator said, well, that's really unusual amongst doctors. He said, okay, yeah, but what occupation do people with that personality usually do? And the facilitator said, social working. And that really made me, although it took John aback, and he probably wouldn't have made a very good social worker. I don't think he really belonged in hand surgery doing what he did, but it really made me understand that's what gave him that natural ability to understand what people's perspective and what they needed. And throughout my 29 years after I left Wrightington, whenever we met, either at BSSH meetings or at Northwest Surgical Hand Society meetings, that 10 or 15 minutes you got to chat with John, which mainly consisted of him asking me how I was getting on and listening and giving advice, and me inquiring about his health, were always very valued and will be greatly missed. So if you're watching, John, I'd like to really thank you for your intelligence. You taught me an awful lot. Your inspiration, it's been a great career as a hand surgeon, but particularly for the interest you've shown. It's been much appreciated. They do say you shouldn't meet your heroes, but I do regard myself as being really fortunate not to have just met one of my heroes, but to have had him as a trainer and mentor. So thank you. And now I'll pass on to Mike Cragen, who I think we just about overlapped as hand fellows at Wrightington. So Mike, thank you.
Thank you, Steve, and I hope everyone can hear me. I'd just like to echo Steve's view about what an honor it is to be asked to speak this evening about such a great man. I think we all have an awful lot of stories and tales to tell about what John has done for us and how he's helped us over our careers and our lives, but only a short time to talk about it this evening. But I arrived at Wrightington in January 1992 as a rather nervous registrar, having been appointed by the Royal College of Surgeons to do a research fellowship with him. This was between my registrar and senior registrar posts, so I wasn't particularly experienced in hand surgery at that point, and still not really 100% sure what the second C in TFCC really stood for. And it was around the same time that Ian Trail started, and I think John had just had his third coronary artery bypass graft. And I was told, maybe slightly unkindly, by one member of staff that I was really lucky and I should take advantage of my time with him because he might not be around for much longer. So I'm just so pleased that he was able to be around for another 30 years to enthuse and inspire other people, both at work and outside work. As many have said, John had a huge enthusiasm for his work and was always happy to talk about anybody who might have new ideas, and seemed, despite the fact that the family were taking major exams that year, to have endless time to sit and talk about it. He was incredibly innovative and inspired me and others to think in a very imaginative way, particularly about the wrist. And sometimes you could get rather carried away by this. And so in some ways I was grateful for Ian's presence, because from time to time he would inject a little bit of good northern realism into the ideas that John had come up with. He was also a very patient surgical teacher, which in some ways seemed a little bit odd when you first met him because he was a bundle of energy. And he certainly helped me as my struggles to get an arthroscope into the wrist, and seemed to be happy to give me endless time to do that. He also gave me tips that fortunately have now allowed me to do the cases myself and allow my trainees to look admiringly at what I'm able to do. And I just told him that these are tricks that I learned from John Stanley. And even when I left Wrightington, he remained somebody who was always approachable, always supportive, always interested. He invited me back to give talks, and not really quite sure why. And I remember calling him after I became a consultant about a case of distal radioulnar joint instability and Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And he freely admitted to me that he'd had lots of cases of that. He'd done 10 different operations, and so far none of them had worked. But he was very happy to have a go at something else. And I always admired the fact that his patients seemed to be very happy about what he'd done for them, even if the operations hadn't necessarily worked. Fortunately, we came up with another technique that we tried. He gave up his precious time to come to Birmingham to do the first of 2 operations with me. And then subsequently, I then went up to Wrightington to do the second one with him. I was slightly taken aback at the end of the operation to find that he'd disappeared. And I found him in the recovery area having his carotid artery massaged by one of the recovery nurses, as he seemed to have a bit of a run of a tachycardia. But he seemed to be incredibly cheerful at the time and seemed to take all his health issues in good part. One of the things I learned from him was the fact that both plastic and orthopedic surgeons and physiotherapists and occupational therapists could work together in hand surgery. And we've managed to emulate that model here in Birmingham, which I think is something that's quite unusual around the world. And it certainly makes a huge difference from our point of view to the way that hand surgery can be run. I'd like to finish by just saying that you sometimes only realize what you've learned from your teachers when you become a teacher yourself. I miss you, John. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. I think Steve has me down to speak next. I'm not really qualified. When I look at everybody in front of me on the screen here, I don't feel very qualified to be amongst such greatness in terms of hand surgery, and that is essentially the measure of Professor John Stanley. My only qualification, in fact, is that I was his fellow in 2007, 2008, and it was the highlight of my training. I was certainly consider myself as very fortunate. For those who never had that privilege, having John Stanley when he would arrive in the hospital, because in that particular year, his health would be up and down, but it was always there was always the vibe in theatre when Prof attended theatre, lifted everyone's spirits up, and he was just a master artist in theatre. All the fellows would huddle round to watch him perform surgery, and it was a performance, really. He made everything look so easy. Theatres was one thing, clinics was another. We would, as fellows, be used to getting patients coming from all over the country. We'd had many operations and many revisions, but sent over to Wrightington. And as fellows, we'd be scratching our heads and with trepidation going in to see these patients. When we would then go and find Prof to help us review the patient, he'd make everything look so simple. And when things were very difficult, as is mentioned before, he had this way of holding the patient's hand and looking at them, and with a twinkle in his eye would talk about tea and sympathy. So he was an amazing surgeon, it's been said, but for me personally, as a mentor, he helped me in my career, not just training me how to do certain operations and how to manage certain situations, but afterwards as well. I think I learned from him what leadership is. He had a very clear vision and understood how to get there, and I observed that from him, and it was something special to see that I hadn't seen before in my training thus far. I think more than anything else, he was a very kind man. He was kind and generous with his time. And we all know now at this stage of our careers how precious time is, the most valuable commodity. And yet he had time for people, he had time for everyone, he had time for his trainees. And that's the more precious than money is the time. And we know now as trainers ourselves how precious that time is. And he had that to give. And the way he treated everybody with such respect, whoever they were in the hospital, the porters, the cleaners, the theatre staff, that was a true example of a true leader and a true human being, and I think that's what stays with me. So it was, like I say, the highlight of my training to have the privilege of working for him and with him, and it's something that sits very proudly, that name on my CV, and the reports he wrote about me mean a lot to me as my trainer. I would like to pass on to David.
Well, thank you, Zaf. Rather than being one of John's fellows or local colleagues, I'm just a mere person from a long way away, but that never made you any less relevant in John's eyes. I would come up to Wrightington initially as a delegate, and then quite a few times as faculty. And John always made those courses feel so special. You wanted to go to Wrightington, either to teach or to be taught. And John was always as keen to learn from the delegates and the faculty as we were from him. He was always learning from everyone around him. If he taught us surgery on cadavers or lectures, he just had this knack of making the procedure seem so logical, so simple, and you go away with that confidence to do it yourself. And John, what a sense of humour. He was always funny, always light-hearted, always full of jokes, many of which I couldn't possibly repeat for you this evening. Several years ago, we were running courses on pyrocarbon up at Wrightington, a fascinating material, And how honoured I was when John showed me his custom-made pyrocarbon knob on his beloved Jag. Whenever you bumped into John, he would always inquire about you. He'd teach you, he'd made you feel individual, he'd support you without fail. But he never drew attention to his own health. I remember the BSSH meeting up in Leicester, and he was just, as ever, asking about how things were going when I got that precious 5 or 10 minutes with him. And he started to slur and slump and sweat. I said, John, are you all right? He said, oh, yes, don't worry, I'm just fibrillating. And he carried on being interested in me. And that was so humbling. When I came to apply for a big academic promotion a few years ago, I had to somehow rustle up 11 referees. And John was an obvious choice, even though I was way outside his immediate purview. I was a nobody from a long way away. He'd followed what I did, he taught me, he listened to me, he knew me. And even though I'd never worked from him as a trainee or worked with him as a colleague, he was just an obvious referee. And I have to say, his kudos, reputation and eloquence in the reference played no small part in getting him that job. And John, what a privilege it really is to have had you as a backer, and thank you from my heart. John, your influence as president still resonates with your successors, that drive for excellence in teaching, in research, the cohesion of plastics, orthopedics and hand therapy that makes British hand surgery so strong, the striving for democracy within our hand society, the promotion of hand surgery as a unique speciality. And that legacy really does run all the way through the BSSH even to this day. So John, you were an inspiration, you were a role model, and I have to say, you really were, for me, a real hero. And I think you're a hero to all of us, John. Rest in peace. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And thank you for all the speakers so far. But it is really important we move into the final section, which is the people who worked alongside John at Wrightington, some for many, many years, and really knew him best as a colleague and friend. So I think Sumed's going to start this section. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. So I hope everyone can hear me. When I think of John, I feel this immense gratitude that I met him, Gail and his lovely family. We learned so much from him and from Gail. It was not just about hand surgery or orthopedics or research. As fellows, then as consultants, we always felt part of the Wrightington Stanley family. And this legacy that we've inherited from him, this collegiality that we have, has stood us in very good stead recently, and will continue to do so in the difficult days that are ahead of us. He was a great help to me, particularly when I started off as a consultant with cadaveric courses. And I still remember he used to start the day off with his first lecture with the expression, welcome to the center of the universe. I used to love that. I remember him turning up for one of our cadaveric sessions, and where he used to do some of his favorite procedures. And Gail rang in the morning and said, look, he's not very well. She spoke to Mavis. And I was very surprised to see him first thing in the morning at 9 for his session. And I have to say, he didn't look very well at all. But then he started chatting to some of his friends in the faculty and his delegates, and he brightened up a little bit. And then when I handed him the knife, the old John Stanley was back, step after step, with precision and his usual panache. He presented. I think he was doing a ECU tenodesis, and he did it really very well. But then when he finished, he just said that he wasn't staying for lunch, and I knew something was wrong, because we like our lunches at Wrightington. So it was only later that we found out that he had an elective procedure the next day, and I don't think Gail has been very impressed with us since then. So Wrightington was certainly the center of the universe for him, and I will miss him dearly. But all his fond memories will remain. Thanks, Steve. I think it's CY next, isn't it?
Professor Stanley, he was always known to me as Prof and will always remember so. I have no doubt that many doors have been opened for me because of the legacy that he left behind. I'd just like to share two stories to show what Prof meant to me. As I became part of the consultant body of Wrightington family, I tried to follow his great footsteps by participating in scientific conferences and speaking in meetings. So on so many occasions after my lecture, there are so many senior surgeons who would come up to me and then share with me stories and encounters that they have had with Prof, either as a visitor or just one clinical encounter in clinic. They would share with me with such good fond memories and also explain to me in details how Prof would interact with a certain patient. It really struck me what a special man and what a special clinician Prof was. And also to let me know how privileged I am to be associated with Prof and Wrightington. I'd just like to share one more thing of my last encounter with Prof, if I may share screen. Last year, we all have to grapple with what pandemic has meant to us. As you can see, that was on the 27th May 2020. I ran a virtual journal club discussing one of Prof's classic paper. As you can see on there, he was smiling. He was still exuding so much enthusiasm. Even across Zoom, you couldn't help but feel inspired. And I wish I have had many more journal clubs since then. Sadly, that was my last encounter with Prof, and it will always be in my mind. Prof, you will always be my inspiration. Thank you.
Linda?
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Yes.
Okay. I first crossed paths with John Stanley in the early 70s. We did the same Liverpool training circuit. He as a junior doctor, me as an OT student. I only actually remember two people from that time. One was an orthopedic consultant who ruled with terror, and the other, John Stanley, who didn't terrify me at all. But I remember him because even in those early years, he displayed a talent and personality that would take him places. Our next encounter was when he was an orthopedic registrar at Ormskirk District Hospital. I had my first job there on the acute psychiatric unit, so we didn't actually work together, but our paths crossed because it was a small hospital, but mainly because he was always in the OT department using our tools to try out his ideas. I left Ormskirk for a baby break. When I was ready, which was 5 years later, to return to work, I rang Wrightington to see if there was a job. There was. John Stanley had funding for a part-time therapist on the part-time hand service he was developing there. So it started, 2 part-timers. From the start, he had a vision to develop a skilled hand service for our region and to take it nationally and internationally. He knew he couldn't do it alone. He needed support, and that he got in bucket loads from his wife, Gail, and from his family. But he needed it at work as well. So he set about building a work family, a team, not by terror, but by engaging and inspiring those around him. He brought out the best in people. He certainly brought out the best in me. I've done okay in my career, and it's because he gave me the belief that I could do it and supported me through it. I'm sure many, many, many of you feel the same. He recognized that everyone had a part to play in his vision. I think he naturally had a positive regard for people, whatever their job title. He talked to everyone. As you know, he liked to talk, but he could also listen and act on what he heard. He never had to worry what type of mood he would be in. He was always pleasant to work with, even when he had a difficult day ahead of him or a long clinic. And in return for this, everyone did their best for him. And as a consequence, the unit grew in strength. In 2004, the unit won the Surgical Team of the Year. The judge told me that he had been impressed that surgeons, nurses, therapists, secretaries had all taken part in the presentation. That's because John Stanley was a great team builder. He organised away days to which all were welcome. We went to York, Amsterdam, London, Chester, and we had lots of parties. These were all fun events, but they had a purpose. They broke down barriers between professions and individuals. He knew. Lost a piece of paper. He knew that it was the sort of activity that facilitated communication, understanding, and good, efficient working practice. Mr. Stanley was loved and trusted by his patients, many of them with highly complex needs. This spurred him on to develop new techniques, and they appreciated that. I remember him saying, no matter how long or hard the clinic has been, you treat the last patient as well as the first. And he did. John Stanley was a very talented, innovative surgeon who achieved his goal of delivering an excellent upper limb service. His personal and professional achievements are monumental, and he did it against the odds. He was the type of person that entered a room and lit it up. He will be sorely missed, but his legacy will live on. I'm so privileged to have known him as a colleague and a friend. I'll pass on to Ab.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda. I have to echo most of what Linda said, but just to over the last few weeks, of course, I've been reliving those early days, and although I've always known that Prof had a huge attainments, it's just become all the more clear, and especially after tonight and listening to all of you, that it's just mind-blowing what he has achieved and what the effects of his life have been. So I just wanted to look in, just give you a little picture. What was it like those very first days? Well, I wasn't there the very first days. I joined in 1983, so he and Linda had been working together then for, well, not all of 3 years, because part of that he was off with his first surgery. So what was it like? Linda mentioned that he and she were part-timers. When I joined them in 1983 as the physio member of the team, I too was part-time in that I only had a third of my time allocated to the hand patients. If someone had arrived at Wrightington reception asked to visit the hand unit, they would have either been met with total bewilderment or have been taken on a tour of the hospital from end to end. Operating theatres, of course, 2 3-hour sessions a week. Outpatient department, which none of you will know where the outpatient department was in those days. It was a glorified cupboard in some ways. And we had one consulting room allocated for 2 3-hour sessions a week. As a consequence, Linda and I spent the whole clinic in the consultation room with Mr. Stanley. And that was the most amazing in-service training, education that anyone could have ever had, because we watched this interaction with these patients and learned so much and just picked up the whole ethos. And he knew that it would take more than him to get the right thing for these patients. He knew that they had complex problems and he had this huge surgical skill and understanding, but he knew that it needed somebody else to find out how to tackle it, where to start. You saw some of the slides earlier on of some of the hands that patients that were presented then. And the person who he delegated this task to was Linda, who you've just heard. And she had the skill to find out from the patients what was it that would really help them in their life, however big or small that problem was, and then go back to him, and then he would translate that into a surgical program. And then together we would work out how to treat them, because he also realized that it was no good, and he said it on many occasions in many talks, that however good the surgery, it wouldn't work as well without the hand therapy. And hand therapy was in this country a very new concept then, but he'd espoused it from his time in the States on a fellowship, and he promoted it, and he gave us the opportunity to become experts. Suddenly you become an expert just because you work with one, and it was fantastic. But you've also heard that he was full of ideas. And my first introduction to this was on of my first ward rounds. At a patient's bedside, he suddenly said, "What we need is a ... And I was a little bit sort of tentative, because when you know you need to ask questions, but you don't want to be seen to be asking questions all the time. Anyway, I sort of tentatively said, excuse me, where would I get one of those? And the answer came back, "Oh, nowhere, I've just invented it." And then he'd turn up in the canteen, and he'd have a new idea, and he'd get out an envelope from his pocket, or ask us for a piece of paper, and he'd draw something out or sketch out some plan for something. And he'd continued till all the time to end up in the splint room and actually trying things out. And so I'm just all the more astonished as what I've heard tonight, that obviously things I didn't know, because it was this international world. And I'm so grateful that I was allocated that post way back then, and it went on from there to us all doing things we never dreamt that we'd be able to do, and all because of him. And just thank you. Okay, hand over to, is it Mike Hayton?
I think
Oh no, Nigel Clay, sorry.
Right, hi everybody. I first met John 30 years ago. It was at a wrist symposium in Nottingham. I wasn't a hand surgeon then. I'd just been invited by Nicholas Barton to present some of my research, and I happened to sit next to John at the dinner table. And I don't remember very much about that evening. I know John and I drank a lot of beer and exchanged a lot of questionable jokes, but we became very firm friends. And I moved up to North Wales to take up my consultant job. I had to do hip replacements and spinal surgery and all sorts of things. But I also had to do my share of the hand surgery. And every time I had a problem, I rang John, and his answer usually was, Well, come up here and I'll show you how it's done. And gradually, over a period of about 15 years, I suppose, he showed me almost everything that he knew in hand surgery, and I became a hand surgeon as well. I gradually stopped doing hallux valgus and pediatric osteotomies and all the sort of things that you had to do in those days in a DGH. Eventually, of course, I started to get some quite complex problems. I started doing wrist arthroscopies and had problems with distal radial ulnar joints. And John, in fact, suggested that he do some outreach clinics, and he used to drive down in his Jaguar to North Wales, and we do a clinic in the morning of problem patients, and then we do an operating list in the afternoon. And the theatre staff absolutely loved it. I mean, I never used to get a cup of tea made for me when I was in the operating theatre, but John did. I'm never quite sure. Not only did they know how much milk he liked in his tea, but the nurses also knew how long he liked the tea bag left in the hot water. He just seemed to have charmed them so much. One day when we were in the theatre, I was telling him how the previous week I'd been up in a two-seater Spitfire, which belonged to one of the caravan park owners in North Wales. And he was very intrigued by this because, of course, John got his pilot's license when he was a teenager. And anyway, he went back home, and I got a phone call very shortly afterwards from Gail saying, John's not stopped going on about that Spitfire flight. Can you organise one for him? I'd like to buy it him for Christmas. So I got in touch with this friend of mine, and we arranged for John to go and fly in the two-seater Spitfire. And he wrote an account of what it was like to fly in the Spitfire. We turned onto the runway, having to zigzag across the airfield as the forward view whilst taxiing is nil. Full throttle, we started to move, and with what seemed no time at all, we took off, and apparently 5 feet off the ground, he raised the undercarriage and did a full power climbing turn to starboard. Wow, that was such a rush. The cloud ceiling was at about 1,000 feet, and as we were governed by visual flying regulations and did some power dives and tight turns, and then after about 10 minutes, he said, would you like to fly it? My faint memory from my school days reminded me to say, I have control. You have control, came back the reply. Just fly her straight and level. There is no doubt the Spitfire is an extremely sensitive aircraft and has a tendency to be very sensitive to pitch control, and therefore changing pitch control is counterproductive and leads to violent porpoising, which I managed to avoid. Turn right, again, the controls are hypersensitive, and they say turn right in the Spitfire, all you have to do is think right, and it is true. A lovely right turn followed by a left just seemed to happen. A 180-degree turn and a 500-foot climb was followed by the pilot asking me how long since I had flown an aircraft, and I replied, 41 years. His comment I shall remember until my dying day. He said, you haven't lost it, and then went on to say, I wish I had more surgeons to fly with. You all seem to have such soft hands. The memories of that flight are as clear today as they were when I disconnected my intercom lead, released my seat harness, opened the hatch and climbed out onto the wooden step ladders, and still in raptures gave up my parachute, helmet and overalls. On the way home, I think I was still at 1,000 feet, and I don't think I landed for several days. So that was a great thing to share with him. Over the years, we shared emails and texts, and I spent many happy times in the operating theatre with him. In the past 12 months, I kept in touch with him via Zoom meetings because he was locked up at home because of his heart problems. And the last communication I got from him was actually on the day he passed away. I'd gone into hospital to have my appendix out, and I sent him a text, John, guess where I am? I'm in hospital, I'm going to have my appendix out today. And he said, oh, give me a call when you get out of the operating theatre. And when I got out, he'd gone. I'll miss him. Is it over to me now? Yeah. So Mike now. Right. Well, just to everybody, on behalf of the Wrightington family, and Gail and Ian are here with me, we thank the British Answer for doing this in very, very difficult circumstances. John means everything to us and still means everything to us, as you all know. You know, how do the next few minutes just explain what John means to me, to us. The internet connection is unstable, so hopefully you're hearing me. One of my colleagues wrote that no matter what John that if John had been a fighter pilot, done. So how can I explain I can't even scratch the surface. Well, I got to Wrightington by chance, really, as great things I always do. One of the fellows got a job in Australia, and John Stillwell, one of our great colleagues, was really upset about this. And I was John's fellow at Whiston doing plastics. And I said, well, I'll do the job. He said, really? You're starting next week with John Stanley, you know? I said, yeah, I'll do that. So we just had a young baby, and Tuesday night, and I remember 2001, joined Gail and John, 5 or 6 other fellows, Ian, Stillwell, all at dinner in Ormskirk, because we would meet very regularly and still do when we can. Obviously, with COVID, we can't. And Gail said to me halfway through the meal, you look shattered. You need to get home. Wife, thank you for coming. And immediately I knew that this was a very special place to work. It was a very special family that I had to join. And so over the next 2 years, I did my very best to secure a place in the team with John and with all my colleagues. John taught me, like he's taught all the other speakers, a great deal, both as a hand surgeon dealing with patients in clinic, so in the operating room, and he was indeed a master technician. But he taught me also how to be a doctor, how to try to be a decent human. Rarely does a day go by without me remembering something he taught me or showed me or mentioned to me, and I bound about it to my fellows all the time. Stanley showed me that, and Ian said it to me as well. And Ian, you get a look at it as well. You've taught me a great deal as well, and that's what it's all about. It's about succession. So in clinic, John would, if an operation on the occasion hadn't gone well, John would look at the patient and say, too soon to know if it's not worked. Look, the scar's still red on the outside. So if it's red on the outside, it's red all the way down to where we operated. So it's too early to say. 12 months later, still sore. John would say, well, Professor Stanley, you said to me, when it goes white, we know whether it's, oh no, but collagen takes a model. So I want to see you in 18 months' time. And then they'd come back in 18 months' time, still with pain. These were complex cases, having 6 or 7 operations around the country. And John would look at them and say, but you've definitely got a problem. We all know that. That's without a question. But unfortunately, science is not advanced enough yet for us to image it. I went back in a couple of years because we're about to get a new MRI scanner. And I think that's when we'll get to the bottom of that problem. So he taught us how to deal with these problem patients in clinic. But he taught us so many surgical tips that just aren't in the books. I hope that, through his teachings, pass them down onto the next generation. Now, John did not have a jealous bone in his body. And he would always take great pleasure in hearing how we're doing in our careers, how we're doing with interesting cases. And the interesting things with John would patients, if he couldn't help them surgically, what he would say to you is, believe in your patients. And we've heard the other speakers said about tea and sympathy. Tea and sympathy should certainly be included in your range of treatment. Do nothing, sympathy, and then move on to the logical lab treatment. John never stopped learning. And I remember I did parallel with John for 5 years and would be running into each other's theatres, seeing pathology.
he would be showing, and people have talked at length about what a man, he could make any complex operation look like a carpal tunnel. I remember in the last month before he clinically retired, and we know he was carried on teaching up until just a few months ago, but in the last month of his clinical teaching, came in to watch me do a Wilby sling for a base of thumb arthritis that Ian Traylor taught me and that the Mayo Clinic had taught Ian Traylor. Stanley said, before I go, show me how to do a Wilby sling, because I really think, I think it's a good operation and I'm not going to do an LRTI anymore. And that was probably John's last base of thumb operation. So he was always learning. And, we as hand surgeons never stop pushing yourself, never stop learning. And he would use hand therapists. And it was great to see our hand therapists tonight, Anne and results. So for me to close out, and Gail's going to say a few words, I would urge us all to be a little bit more like John. Be caring, listen. I've alluded to it, great. Time, give time. We're all running around all the time. And if the last 12 months has taught us all anything, is give people time that they need. Be open to new ideas, but be above all, be just kind to each other. And it's now time for us all to step up to the plate and fill this enormous void that has been left. I urge all. We're going to miss John enormously, but through us, John's life and legacy will continue. And I'm really, really grateful for everything that John and Gail have shown us and still with us. And Gail's here now with us, and she wants to say a few words.
It's not.
No, it's not you. Let me get there we go.
Okay.
Sorry, Gail.
Don't worry.
If you speak now.
Okay. Can you hear me, everybody? Can you hear me, Anne? I see you there. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, right. Well, first of all, I just want to say to you all, thank you for participating in this absolutely fantastic evening. I just know that had John, I hope he is listening, he would be so incredibly touched and so proud. He'd be absolutely overwhelmed. Take it from me, I know him so well. Now, I just wish, before I do anything else, to thank Steve Hodgson and the BSSH for putting on this absolutely remarkable tribute. And also to Ian and Mike, because they have not only helped me tonight, but have really supported me a lot since we lost. Now, John's birthday would have been next week, and he would have been 77. But I just want to tell you all that I'm so grateful for so many things. I am so grateful that I got those extra years with him that we were certainly would never have expected from his early diagnosis when he was 30 of age. And I'm also so grateful for the deep love that we had for each other, because without those two, I do not know how I would have got through the past few weeks. And I'm also grateful that he died quickly, and I'm also grateful that he died in our own home, because that is the way John would have wanted to go. From 1979, together had such fun building up the unit at Wrightington. Now, I think it's apparent from that he absolutely adored Wrightington Hospital, and he loved its staff and all that passed the unit. I number of occasions to get a national honour for John. But I can honestly say that it never bothered him that we didn't, because he felt so strongly that his greatest pride in, his greatest legacy was the number of surgeons that he trained throughout the world. And over the years, there were a few places that we hadn't visited on our desire and our joys of meeting the fellows in Singapore and Australia and New Zealand and in America and all the lovely people that have spent the night. I really went with John, and I went with him, not because I wanted to do, but because I actually went with him. He would rest at meetings and he would have more of a break. But as you know how wrong I was, because it actually had no effect at all. But it eventually became fun for me to meet you all, and I know everybody who has spoken tonight, and as well as his. So thank you so much. Now, when John retired, he was remarkably contented at home, and he was happy in Wrightington's involvement in him in the developing upper limb unit. And I tell you, was inordinately proud of that unit. Now, I want to say to you that he had a really happy life. He had a really full life, despite some very tough periods when he suffered very much over his health. And Sean, James and I, Sean and James are our children who are listening in tonight. We had some very dark periods over John's health. And I, of course, read about him constantly, rarely talked about it publicly. Today, we as a family, we miss him incredibly as a person. We miss his generosity. We miss his half-full personality, glass half-full personality. We miss his sense of humour, his fairness, his intellect, his decency, his caring for others, his lack of pretension, his lack of snobbishness, and his humility. I even miss his youth on the house, because he would never ever learn how to even put the washing machine as a matter of principle in case I asked him to do it. I also miss his tidiness, and I also miss him putting, as all of you know, he did. If he didn't want to do something, he would put on the back burner as he could. But from listening to you all tonight, thank you so very, very much from me, Sean and James. What a legacy he left. We are heartbroken. We are so proud of him. And thank you to you all for the most wonderful things that you've said about him this evening, which will be with us all forever. And please keep in touch with Sean, James and I, because these are very difficult times and we can't have visitors at the moment because of COVID. But it's very nice to hear from you all. And I just wish to finally say that John had a very strong philosophy. And this was never look back, never have any regrets, live for the future, never be self-indulgent, and always believed life for the living. And I am doing my very level best to follow that diktat in his memory. Thank you. I really am so proud of you and so proud of him. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail. That was really, really lovely. And we've got so many stories that we want to share with you about John. We could speak for weeks, the funny, funny times that we've had. And we hope to share those with you in the summer or at a time we can do. And we invite you all up to Wrightington. It's going to be the biggest Wrightington party you've ever imagined. You're all more than welcome, but it will only be allowed for people who are going to have fun and tell us all these great stuff about him. So thank you so much from us here at Ryan and we'll pass you back to Steve and Zaf.
There's really very little to add to that, Mike. Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to everyone who joined. Thank you particularly to Gail for those fantastic words that we really shouldn't try and follow. This has been recorded and there will be a link on the BSSH website. So if you know people who couldn't make it this evening, please let them know and they will be able to watch it in the next few days. So thank you everyone and look forward to seeing you all at Wrightington in the summer. All right.
Good night.